Welcome to The Explainer. So, today we're unpacking some seriously science backed strategies for getting your work done when you absolutely fundamentally dread it. Like, if you've ever sat down at your desk, opened a textbook, and then suddenly found yourself 3 hours deep into a documentary about medieval siege weapons, yeah, you're in the exact right place. We're going to look at the actual neurology of focus and arm you with strategies that finally work with your brain instead of fighting against it. Okay, let's dive right into this. Why does staring at a textbook literally feel like physical pain sometimes? So often, when we just can't focus, it leads to this vicious cycle, right? Procrastination, the heavy guilt, and that sinking feeling that something is just intrinsically wrong with us. We just think, oh, I'm just lazy. But you know what? Science tells us a wildly different story. Listen to me, you are not lazy, and you are definitely not broken. For a lot of us, especially those of us with ADHD brains or just chronic procrastinators, our prefrontal cortex simply regulates dopamine differently. And dopamine, well, that's the magic stuff that helps our brains assign importance and sustain effort. Without it, your brain isn't just bored on purpose, it is genuinely understimulated. It just needs some external structure and a little bit of neurological hacking to overcome the dread of those super low stimulation tasks, like, reading a dense textbook. So to fix this, we need to completely redefine how we see motivation. We usually think of motivation as this absolute thing, like you either have it or you don't. But motivation is actually a relative competition between whatever tasks are available. Think of it like the empty room analogy. If you're put in a completely blank room with absolutely nothing but a really boring textbook, you're eventually going to read the book. Why? Because it's literally the most interesting thing available in that specific environment. And this brilliantly illustrates the massive problem with how we take breaks. If you take a break from a low stimulation task, say reviewing your notes, to do a high stimulation task like scrolling TikTok or binging Netflix, going back to your textbook feels like a huge, painful downgrade to your brain's dopamine levels. It's rough. To study effectively, you absolutely have to control that competition. You've got to reduce the stimulation of your breaks. Try going for a walk, or even just staring out the window for a bit, so that going back to your desk doesn't feel like a total punishment. Another completely game-changing way to manipulate this dopamine scale is this concept coined by Wharton professor Katie Milkman. It's called temptation bundling. This is a psychological trick where you pair a task you are avoiding with a deeply loved reward. But here is the catch. You can only access that reward while doing the dreaded task. So, for example, you only let yourself drink your absolute favorite fancy coffee or listen to that one highly engaging podcast while you're actively studying. Over time, your brain starts anticipating that reward and, no joke, actually begins to associate the dreaded task with positive feelings. But hey, even with the perfect coffee in hand, how do we actually overcome that paralyzing anxiety of just starting? Scientifically, the initiation phase is the hardest part of the entire study cycle. The longer we delay a task, the more that anxiety builds up. It creates this self-reinforcing loop of avoidance where the dread of the work actually becomes way worse than the work itself. So to break this anxiety loop, cognitive behavioral therapy gives us something awesome called the 5-minute rule. Here's how it works. You simply pick the dreaded task, set a timer for exactly 5 minutes, and, this is crucial, give yourself full permission to quit when that timer rings. By lowering the activation energy required, you totally trick your brain. You aren't committing to some grueling 3-hour study marathon. You're literally just committing to 5 minutes. And the secret here is that once you're actually in motion, that friction just disappears, and it's almost always easier to just keep going. Now, as you plan out those study sessions, go ahead and throw away your traditional to-do lists. Seriously, vague lists are quiet killers for understimulated brains. They treat every single task as equally urgent, which just triggers instant decision paralysis. Instead, use time blocking. Just block out 45 to 90-minute chunks on your calendar for specific tasks. And make sure to build in these 10 to 15-minute transition buffers too, because let's be real, our brains rarely switch contexts cleanly. Right before that time block begins, you need a solid pre-study ritual. I like to call this the 5-minute environment reset. Every visible distraction in your room is just a tiny little tax on your working memory. So clear the desk. Put your phone physically in a completely different room. Close all those extra browser tabs. Grab your water, grab a snack. By removing these visual cues, you're removing any built-in excuses your brain might try to use to flee the chair the second things get hard. Now, what's really interesting to consider here is this fascinating concept called body doubling. Psychologists actually refer to this as the Hawthorne effect or social facilitation. Basically, when you work alongside another person, the mere presence of an observer forces our brains into this really subtle performance mode. Your arousal and alertness naturally increase, which creates that external structure an understimulated brain so desperately needs. And honestly, the best part? You don't even need to talk to the person. You can body double in so many ways. Grab an in-person study buddy at a local library, or use video call working apps like FocusMate to just work silently with a stranger. You can drop into Discord voice channels, or honestly just put on a pre-recorded study with me video on YouTube. Even a digital tracking app like Appenify creates a sort of digital observer. You're basically borrowing a total stranger's discipline and momentum to get your own work done. It is brilliant. So, while you're working alongside that virtual stranger, let's talk about what's actually playing in your headphones. Regular music, yeah, even classical or lo-fi beats, can actually distract ADHD brains because of the lyrics or those sudden dynamic shifts. Instead, try functional music. Apps like Brain.fm use this scientifically engineered rhythmic audio that features something called neural phase locking. Basically, it provides just enough stimulation to keep the restless part of your brain perfectly engaged without accidentally pulling your attention away from the textbook. You can also totally hack your dopamine by gamifying your study sessions. Instead of setting vague goals, define clear quests. Track your progress with visual bars, earn badges, keep up those study streaks. It sounds silly, but this completely satisfies our deep psychological needs for competence and autonomy. Oh, and here's a quick little biological hack while you play this study game. Take a sip, just a sip, don't gulp it, of a sugary drink like apple juice. It actually provides a steady stream of glucose, which is the primary fuel your brain needs for intense focus. So the crucial point here, beyond what you drink, is how you move. Sitting completely still is actually super taxing on a kinesthetic or ADHD brain. Physical movement naturally boosts your dopamine and norepinephrine, which, by the way, are the exact same neurotransmitters targeted by focus medications. So embrace the fidgeting. Tap your foot, pace around the room while you're reviewing flashcards, or literally do 20 jumping jacks during your break. Movement actively primes your brain chemistry for learning. All right, let's shift gears and talk efficiency. Because if you really hate studying, the ultimate goal is to finish faster, right? Well, get this. Research shows that 84% of students study by rereading their textbooks. And unfortunately, rereading is literally the most ineffective way to study for an exam. It is entirely passive. Honestly, it's a lot like trying to learn how to play basketball just by sitting on the bench watching your coach play. If you want to study less but actually learn more, you absolutely have to switch from passive to active studying. The whole science of learning relies really heavily on the testing effect. Pulling information out of your head is so much more effective for memory retention than passively trying to just cram it in. So close the book, write out practice tests, try teaching the concept out loud to an imaginary student in your room. Make those flashcards. I know it feels harder in the moment, but that increased effort is what creates actual, lasting learning. You also need to space this active recall out. Educators call this distributed practice. Look, a 3-hour cram session the night before a huge test, it's terrible for retention. Instead, try studying for just 45 minutes a night, spread over 4 days. Why? Because you actually get to sleep on it. During sleep, your brain is busy replaying the day's events and rehashing all that new info. By spreading it over 4 days, you are literally using sleep to actively solidify those memories 4 completely separate times. And oh my gosh, here is a totally wild sensory hack to boost that sleep memory connection. Use your nose. Smell is an incredibly powerful study tool. Research actually shows that if you expose yourself to a specific scent, like, say, peppermint oil, while you're studying, and then place a small dish of that exact same scent right by your bed while you sleep, your brain associates the scent with the material. It actively helps your brain retain way more of that information overnight. How cool is that? Let's move to time management and see how this all builds into the famous Pomodoro technique. You've probably heard of the standard setup, right? 25 minutes of work followed by a 5-minute break. But listen, this shouldn't be rigid. You have to adapt it to your own time blindness and energy levels. If your motivation is completely non-existent, just do a 10-minute sprint. But if you hit a flow state and you're in the zone, extend it to 50 minutes with a 10-minute break. The absolute golden rule here, though, is to fiercely protect those breaks so your brain can actually reset. Because frankly, if you don't protect those breaks, you risk hitting academic burnout. And this isn't just feeling kind of tired after an all-nighter. It's a chronic condition that comes from prolonged study.
Ignoring your body's need for recovery leads to very real psychosomatic symptoms. We are talking terrible tension headaches, chronic insomnia, getting sick more often, and a complete, devastating loss of both motivation and confidence.
To prevent or recover from that level of burnout, you've got to treat your work-life balance with the exact same discipline as your studies. You have to make time for enjoyable activities. Get outside into nature, because just being around greenery is scientifically proven to reduce stress levels. Vigorously protect your weekends to give your mind a true, actual break. And hey, if the burnout ever feels just way too heavy to lift on your own, please never hesitate to seek professional help. It is absolutely crucial.
Wow, we've covered a ton of ground today in this explainer, from temptation bundling and body doubling to the 5-minute rule and the magic of peppermint oil. The big takeaway here is that studying doesn't have to be this torturous uphill battle against your own biology. By understanding how your brain actually seeks out dopamine and structure, you can completely reclaim your time. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. Are you going to let your brain's default wiring dictate your success, or are you ready to hack the system? Seriously, what is the very first strategy you are going to use today to finally conquer that assignment you've been dreading?